Thank you everyone for joining us for this session, aptly titled Transforming Floral E-Commerce. If there's anything we've learned during this pandemic, it's understanding the potential growth areas of the industry in order to make it more resilient in the future. Yes, to bulletproof from a global epidemic standpoint, but also bulletproof as the needs, desires, and shopping patterns of our customers change and evolve. Joining us today from Venice, California is John Tabis, a leading e-commerce innovator. We're going to inundate him with questions today and learn how he and his company, thebooks.com, have embraced the industry and transformed the old way of e-commerce into a fresh new business model. How did he start it? I'm curious to know. How did he scale it after it started? And how does he keep it fresh and new in the eyes of the consumer? First, a little bit about John to start us off. John is the founder and CEO of the Books Company. BOUQS.com is where you'll find his company. In 2012, along with co-founder Juan Pablo Montefar, he launched the company in Marina del Rey, California, with no headquarters. Everyone was working part-time. In fact, the first time I met John, I was following my GPS to his corporate location, and it took me into a housing subdivision, and my GPS said, "Stop here, you've reached your destination." And I looked over, and it was a house. And so I swirled around the block a couple times, and I thought, surely it's not in this house. And 2 or 3 times it says, "You've reached your destination," and it was stopping at a house. So sure enough, I walked up on the porch and gingerly knocked on the front door, and there they were, and that was about a year after they started. So I still remember that story. It's so funny, but here they were all staged in their separate areas, and I remember seeing the design room and back. And you talk about very humble beginnings, and this was one of them, so you're gonna love this story. The goal for the Books was to redefine the flower buying experience for the consumer. Redefine it, delivering an online floral space that delivers flowers and plants from eco-friendly, sustainable farms around the world, straight to the doorstep with no middleman. Imagine that. Prior to launching the Books Company, John worked in corporate brand strategy at Walt Disney Company, Shoe Dazzle, and in management consulting at Bain & Company. He graduated summa cum laude from the University of Notre Dame, another great university in my home state of Indiana. His claim to fame at Notre Dame was he was the only person to ever make the football team, and not the basketball team, but the Glee Club. So that's a funny story, and imagine that. Not too many people have that notable achievement in their history. John earned his MBA with honors from the UCLA Anderson School of Management, where he studied on fellowship. He's a coveted speaker. You'll see him everywhere. He speaks on brand strategy and startups. He contributes to LinkedIn a lot. I love reading his material and his responses, and they're always so good and so sharp. He's appeared on numerous TV shows, including ABC's Shark Tank. So you're going to hear that story also. It's a wild story. And you can imagine watching Shark Tank, what it's like sweating in front of the sharks. And I want him to tell that story because I watched it and I was sweating too. I was so worried. And he's been on Access Hollywood, 2020. And he also mentors early stage startups at Blue Chip Accelerators, Techstars, and Amplify LA. So if you have a startup business, you might want to hook up with John, and I'm sure he has some great advice for you. He also serves as a board member for the National Association of Women Business Owners in LA, and is the host of the podcast, let me see, Give 'em the Biz. I think I said that right. And you'll find more about John on johntabis.com, JOHNTABIS.com. And you'll see where you could hook up with a podcast, which is also hilarious. It's very casual. It's just like John sitting in your family room and you're talking. So you have a lot of places you can check out the business and check out John personally. So thank you for joining us, John.
Happy to be here, and thanks for the kind introduction.
First, how has the business weathered? I know top of mind for everybody with COVID. How has the business weathered? How is the team? Is everybody safe? And what is your working structure? How has it changed?
Yeah, it's been obviously a crazy time, I think, for everyone. We went to 100% fully remote workforce about 2 weeks before California formally forced businesses to close. So early-ish March. And we did that because one of our employees thought they may have potentially been exposed to COVID. And it obviously, and I think rightfully, made folks nervous. And so we went to remote. And one of the nice things about being a technology-centric company is that everyone was pretty well prepared for that transition. And so we really didn't skip a beat. And we've been 100% remote. Maybe 2 to 4 people might be in the office on any given day if they're doing a photo shoot or if they have to onboard an employee or something like that. But otherwise, 95, 99% of the company is going to be working from home. That change has been pretty dramatic. What really hasn't changed that much is our business. We are built on this platform to help farmers deliver directly to end consumers, and we work with third-party florists as well. And other than a few moments here or there of folks having to shut down, we haven't really had a massive impact. So we've considered ourselves extremely lucky, especially knowing that a number of businesses in our industry and obviously others have been materially impacted.
And you've done many things already in your career, and we'll talk a little bit about those in a minute. But when did the idea of a flower business occur to you? Because many of the people in the flower business are long tenured. They have history of floral and ancestors. How did it occur to you? And did you adapt it right away? Or did you think, nah, that could never happen. I'm not a flower guy. How did all that transpire?
Yeah, so I was always a flower guy personally. I remember giving my 7th grade girlfriend a dozen red roses for Valentine's Day. I was super suave as a middle schooler, but always was a fan of the product. I'm a fairly emotional human being. Flowers are obviously filled with emotion, and so was a lover of the category as a consumer, but never had sort of a professional or even academic interest in the space. My career was in entertainment at Disney and strategy prior to that. And so I brought a lot of what I learned at Bain and at Disney into my startup career, which started at Shoe-Dazzle, which is a fashion company. And my co-founder and I, who grew up in Floral, his family friend had a rose farm while he was a teenager, and who studied biochemistry to become a farmer, eventually became a general manager of a farm down outside of Quito, Ecuador. And he was one of my best friends from college at Notre Dame. And so really it started with us just having conversations. He was talking through some of the challenges he faced as a farmer around cash flow, around margin, around transparency of sourcing. And this farm really invested heavily in people and in the planet and sustainability. And there was no way for him or his farm to really help the consumer understand what they did to protect the land and protect their labor. And so he came at it from both an economic and a more human-centric perspective to say, hey, there's some challenges here. I'd love to talk with you about how you might solve them, just as a sort of a friend and a confidant. And we started having those conversations. Mm-hmm. And as he taught me about the farming side of the business, which I literally knew nothing about before we started this company, and I started thinking more and more about it from the consumer side. And for me, it was about building a brand like what we learned to build at the Walt Disney Company, a brand that pulls you in, that builds a long-term relationship with the customer. And I thought there was an opportunity in there to build a brand that would particularly appeal to me. I used myself as the guinea pig. Mm-hmm. And so when I thought about that, and I thought, well, if my co-founder, Juan Pablo's farm, is in any way representative of other farmers in the space, and if I represent in any way some proportion of the populace, we should be able to put together a solution that helps both entities. And that's really what we set out to do. And so we kind of for about 3 or 4 months, just kind of kicked around ideas and started talking about it, and then got more and more excited. And after about that time frame, we started pulling together what was a pretty hacked together team at the time, because we didn't have any money or really people or resources to try to get this thing off the ground.
But then as you were developing the business plan, you came to the realization, or you probably knew it right away, there are other big players in that lane. How did you think that your concept would compete with those? And what did you want to do differently that says the customer is going to think of the books differently than your generic.com that had been around for many, many years?
Sure. I mean, at the very beginning, we looked at the supply chain that we built as the core of the business. This capability to say this particular bouquet left this farm on this date. And that was not something we saw in the industry. We didn't see folks telling stories about, hey, this is Farmer Gino, and Farmer Gino grows X, Y, and Z varieties, and this is how Farmer Gino protects the land and protects labor. We didn't see that. And so that was our foundation for really everything. And that was really the heavy lifting. You know, we've now spent well north of $15 million building out a technology platform that can automate international and domestic logistics for, you know, we work with over 140 farms around the world. And so it started with that nugget of how do we build a platform that can make it better for both directions. And then from there, it really became about who do we want to target and what's important to those folks. And we sort of, again, used myself as a guinea pig. We've been at this now for 8 years. At the time, I was 35 years old, sort of in the sweet spot of where Books kind of plays today. But we looked at, you know, if you were sort of 25 to 35 years old, what do you care about? What do you want to buy? How do you want to buy? And we came up with a number of things that we saw in the research and in interviews and in talking to folks that we felt really resonated. One thing that we did was we had one price point. We had $40 flat, free delivery, no other fees. It was just $40 flat. We also had 40 SKUs. We kept it very limited. You could only choose from 40 items. Today, all that's gone. But at the beginning, we really tried to set our experience as sort of as far apart from what we saw, which was normal, which was lots of price points, lots of discounts, lots of fees, and lots of items. And we sort of very much just shrunk it down. And that's really what put us on the map, was this combination of international logistics straight from the farm. We're talking about farms in Ecuador and Colombia and around the world, and it was unique and different. And then also this way of merchandising and pricing, which really hadn't been done before. And so it was those combination of things that we tried to lean on. Over time, of course, we've evolved. You know, customers said to us, well, I don't only want 40 choices. I want more varieties. And so now we have hundreds of choices. People said, I don't want one size. I would like to have a medium or a large. You know, can I get more flowers? And we said, sure. And so we've adapted the business as we've gone. But that foundation of technology that connects the world is really still the core of what we do.
And you said earlier, you know, obviously you had great ideas and a great synergy with your partner, and you could identify with the consumer, but you didn't have any money. So the roughest part of a new startup is convincing people most of the time that don't know anything about the floral business, why is this different? And getting them to invest not hundreds of dollars, but millions of dollars. How did you approach that? Did you have help doing that? Did you tackle that on your own? How did that come to fruition? Because that was an integral part, but you're talking to people who aren't in the flower business.
Yeah, you know, at this point, in investment, we've raised almost $80 million in the history of the business. But the whole way, it was a process of trying to bring people into this idea that we can build this community via this technology. And that started off with, you know, when we started the business, we raised a $13,000 friends and family round. You know, in Silicon Beach, where we are in Silicon Valley, friends and family rounds can be $3 million. For us, it was $13,000. And it was also not just getting money, and it was getting people. You know, I got friends and friends of friends, and I hired a developer from UCLA, all on this idea that we could build this thing and make it big. And that would be a great opportunity for them to learn, a great opportunity for them to be a part owner in the business, because everyone got equity. Everyone at the Books Company still gets equity in the business. And so building up this resume builder, and if it doesn't work out, it'll be a super fun, interesting project anyway. And so there was convincing early employees and then early investors. You know, we raised that 13,000. in that first, sort of year, we didn't have any additional capital, but then we raised, a $1.7 million seed round and then a $5.5 million A round. And again, we've raised, large amounts of money since. I had never raised money for a company before, so I didn't have a set of experience. I didn't really have a network in it. I had been at ShoeDazzle, the other startup, for about 6 months. So I met a few people, but they tended to be folks that invested in much bigger businesses, not where we were at the time. And so the way that we really got everyone on board, and this also includes farms, by the way, at the very beginning, we went to farmers and we said, hey, this will be great for your business. You'll make more money, we'll pay you faster, all these types of things. And most farmers were just kind of like, no, thanks. We don't work that way. We're not interested in that. How many orders are you going to give me? And when we'd tell them how little we were, they would just say, not really interesting. Totally reasonable response, right? They didn't know us from Adam. We were just a couple random guys. But we got enough farms. We got 2 or 3 at the very beginning. But with farmers, with employees, and with investors, the same thing worked, which was showing the results. We worked really hard at telling the story about what we envisioned and how we want to get there and how you could be a part of it and how great that would be. But at the end of the day, what really got farmers on board was they would talk to the first 2 farms. The first 2 farms would be like, this has been great. It's a great team. They treat us really well. They're in it for the right reasons. They stick by their word, and they're growing our business with us. And so other farms would say, well, great, I want to grow my business too. Employees would talk to other employees and say, hey, it's a great experience. We're learning a lot. It's a struggle, but we're making it. And same thing with investors. They've done a great job. They've helped our investment become worth more money. So we're happy. Now, of course, no business is like this. No business is a straight line. We've had our ups and downs along the way, but generally speaking, we say we're going to do something and then we go do it. And we found that has led to trust, and then trust leads to commitment, and then, partnership over the long run. And some of our farms that we've been with since, day one. Our original 3 farms are still part of the network. We still work with them on a daily basis. And so those relationships have been, fostered over time. Explaining folks about the industry really wasn't that big of a hurdle, because people understand Floral at its core, which is it's a gorgeous, natural product that brings people joy or comfort. And so we didn't have to, the folks that tended to apply to join our company were already leaning in that direction. They were applying to a floral company for a reason. They either had experience with the product, or they wanted to, or they loved it as a consumer and they wanted to be a part of it. And so that part was actually relatively easy. We didn't have to do too much education. Now, whenever any of those employees got in their first Valentine's Day or their first Mother's Day, there was a massive learning curve that we all had in those early days. And that's not something you can really teach. Everyone in this industry understands sort of what those holidays are like. But it's been a really great journey, and it's because of all the amazing people that have pitched in and really believed in what we're trying to do.
Well, and don't you feel like if the farms trust you and you bring a new way to work with them, and it's efficient for them, and they know that you're going to do your level best on the consumer side to get the word out and to get their product in the hands of the consumer, don't you feel like that's half of the way? You're almost there.
Yeah, I mean, we always thought the value proposition was exciting for everyone. But at the same time, if someone's coming along and they're small, and we were objectively very small at the beginning, and they're asking you to invest time, effort, money in something that could pan out or could literally lead to nothing, it's reasonable to be skeptical. What's great now is that we've developed, I think, really great relationships and a good reputation in the industry where that's no longer an issue. We've traveled now abroad to Africa, Japan, Asia, and around the world, and we now can pretty much open any door we want to open in terms of having conversations about product and partnership, et cetera, because we've had success and because we've been able to show that this model actually works. But on day one, when you have no operating history, no real funding, all you have is really a website and a couple guys making a pitch, it's understandable that folks were a little bit like, I'm not so sure if this is really going to work. But thankfully, a lot of those folks have come on and joined the platform since.
And you've proven yourself time and time again, which helps the history. But speaking of not understanding a concept, I wanted to ask you about the Shark Tank. And as I said at the opening, I can't tell you, watching that, I was sweating. It was like I was in front of them myself, because at first they couldn't understand the concept of why the customer can't receive same day. because they were used to the traditional florist model. Barbara didn't like the name, and I thought, oh my goodness, this can't be good. And when you talked about your forecast, the sharks thought it was so pie in the sky because of where you were now and what you intended to achieve. And of course, it was a great objective. And so you went home with no offers. How did you feel at that point? And did you feel kicked around a little bit, or did it motivate you? And tell us about that experience leaving with nothing.
Yeah, Shark Tank, while on the show, I got completely rejected, as you mentioned, has been one of the best things that's ever happened to me personally and to the company. It's really a top-notch group of people. I've gotten to know some of the folks on the program that work at behind the scenes, and it really has been a real blessing to the business. The experience itself is very stressful. I had pitched hundreds of venture capitalists at that point and been rejected by most of them. So the rejection part wasn't all that stressful. It's more the format. You walk in, bright lights, it's hot. They're all talking at you at the same time, peppering you with questions. Mm-hmm. And it's not for the 6 or 7 minutes that you see online. It's for an hour and 55 minutes, at least it was like about that long for me. And so it is challenging. And it was actually a really good conversation where the sharks had good, legitimate sort of points saying, hey, I don't know about this and what about that? The key, I think, challenges we had were at the time we didn't have next day delivery. We were only delivering out of South America, which was a 5 or 6 day wait. And that was rightfully viewed with skepticism, saying, hey, wait, most customers want it faster than that. And that is true. Mm-hmm. And then, Barbara's criticism of the name, it was just a personal disagreement. I disagree with her. I think our name is super cute. People love it. If you look on, Instagram or Twitter, you'll see a lot of our name being used because people like the name. So, and then, Mark Cuban didn't like investing alongside Silicon Valley investors, which we had already raised $1.7 million in capital. So that was understandable. And Mr. Wonderful just didn't believe we could hit the numbers. But that's also reasonable because lots of people come into the Shark Tank and say, next year, I'm going to do this many millions. And the year after that, I'm going to do this many millions. And how many of those businesses do it? It's, 5, maybe 10%. And so it didn't feel great getting rejected, but it wasn't demotivating in any way. One, because again, I had been rejected by 100 venture capitalists already. And so it wasn't that was painful. I think what was more painful was I felt like I kind of had them kind of close at one point. And you might not get it in the 6 or 7 minutes, but I felt like maybe I was going to get there. And then it ended up being no was more of the disappointment. But we ended up actually getting a shark to invest.
Yes.
And so
tell us about that.
Yeah, a couple of years after we were on the show, I was sitting at my desk and I had a 3 o'clock appointment, and I'll remember it like it was yesterday. At 2:59, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize, and I thought, oh, this is my 3 o'clock. And I picked it up. Hey, John, it's Robert from Shark Tank. And that was how the phone call started. No assistant, no scheduling, no nothing. Robert Herjavec from Shark Tank just called me on my cell phone. He had gotten my number from a producer, and he says, John, I'm getting married. He had just come off of Dancing with the Stars, where he met Kim Johnson, his now wife. Mm-hmm. And they wanted to get married, and he had been looking through and he remembered us and said, hey, I remember you guys having a really interesting model. Do you do weddings? And I was like, why, yes, we do. We started a wedding division not too long ago, and we started talking about it. And what was cool was he didn't, in the pitch, while we spent an hour and 45 minutes together, it's hard. It's a hard industry to understand. There's a lot of moving pieces, right? What we do, all of us in Floral, is difficult. Right? It's a perishable product. It's traveling large distances. It's very dainty. You have to design it. It has to arrive exactly the right time and the exact right day and the exact right condition. So much of it is emotional for the customer. It's a hard thing to understand because it's unlike any other industry in the world, which is what makes it amazing. And so he just didn't get it in that time frame. But as we went through the wedding planning process, and he said, well, wait, why does it work this way? And how did you get that? And how does this pricing work? And I sort of let him under the hood a little bit. At the end of, we had his wedding all planned out. He got married. And afterwards he said, everyone said that these were the most amazing flowers they've ever seen. And when I told them your story, they were even more excited. He's like, can I invest now? And I was like, of course, of course. Wow. And he's been an amazing partner. I just talked to him about 3 weeks ago. For a guy that is that famous and that sort of successful and that wealthy and all those types of things, the most down-to-earth, kind, available human that you'll ever meet. And so couldn't be happier to have Robert as an investor and as a partner in the business. And it's been, a really great journey ever since.
Does he still give you advice, or Does he pretty much just let you go with the flow, or what's your relationship like? Or is it just, hi, how you doing? Did you meet your yearly goal, or what's that relationship like with him now?
Yeah, we stay in pretty regular touch. I would say we probably speak 4 to 5 times a year. And if I emailed him right now, he would get back to me within 3 hours for sure. He's not one of those people that's inaccessible or better than others. He's really a very kind human being. And so, yeah, we'll spend time talking about, you know, we actually spent some time talking about COVID and how to adapt to a COVID world not too long ago. We'll talk about marketing strategy, about fundraising and financing, sort of whatever I might need advice on. He's available, and given his breadth and depth of experience, he can be, you know, he can speak very eloquently and very intelligently on a lot of topics. And so it's been a really great relationship. And he uses us to send flowers quite often as well. So he ended up being a client as well as an investor.
Isn't that funny how, you know, at the point you were on Shark Tank, it didn't work then, but it brought you in many ways to a better place, or a more intimate place with a good investor that you can count on 24/7. I think that's interesting, because I think that's a good story. And a moral of the story is, you know, you want A, but you get B, and sometimes B's better if you just wait and it comes to fruition.
Yeah, when we were sort of featured on Shark Tank in one of those sort of recaps about 2 years ago, and Robert on that episode, you know, and he says this often in social media, is that a no is just another way to a yes. And I think for any entrepreneur, whether it's in Floral or anywhere else, you have to have a firm commitment and an obstinance, a refusal to give up, to say, hey, I'm going to make this work. If after the first 10 no's, I just decided that the world was right and this was never going to work, we would have shut down after the first 6 or 9 months of the business. The world and the business world and investors and customers and partners and everyone will say no, because the world is generally full of a lot of people that don't know everything. And it doesn't mean they're not super smart. I talked to some of the most brilliant venture capitalists in the world, and they said no. I just didn't agree with them. And sort of remembering that everyone's human and that their no's are just fallible decisions, just like any decision we make on any given day, is an important thing when you're trying to build something that people don't quite understand or hasn't been seen before, or is going to be different in some way. And so we just, you know, kept at it, and we kept the mission in mind, and luckily it led to a path that sort of brought us back to Shark Tank.
And didn't I read Mark Cuban also said later that he wished he would have invested?
Yeah, in that 2020 recap, which was sort of the recap, I think it was of the first 100 episodes of Shark Tank. They had like an anniversary show featured on 2020. Robert was telling the story about how he invested and where we were in a business. And we had just closed a $20 million round of funding. And right after that, Mark said, well, then that's the one that I wish I invested in. And we sort of call ourselves the one that got away then for Mark. So a little bit of a feather in the cap, although it would have been better to get him as an investor.
Yeah, yeah. But let's switch gears a little bit to kind of the back end of the business. And I'm curious, as you watch giants in e-commerce, let's say Amazon, that's what a lot of people talk of when they talk about giants in e-commerce. And how do you perceive a category-specific business, say the Books or any other .com, we sell plants and flowers as gifts, competing with company e-commerce giants who are selling gifts more broadly, hundreds of different categories? How do you reconcile what the Books does versus what Amazon does? And is there any learning there? You know, we're in the floral business 1 or 2 or 5 categories of gifting, where Amazon sells purses as gifts, shoes as gifts, blouses, sweaters, the whole thing. How could we fit in, or what's your perception of how the floral industry fits into that giant model, which there may be many more coming down the pipeline?
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that in gifting, in any consumer category, you call it media, you call it automotive, you call it whatever, there is more choice today that is more accessible than in the history of time. And 1 year from now, there will be dramatically more choice than there is now. And so no matter what we do, and Amazon is just the easiest example of that. If you look at Shopify, just as a platform, it didn't exist when we started the Books company, which is not that long ago. You know, we're 7, 8 years old, but Shopify was not a thing when we launched the Books Company. We had to build an e-commerce platform from pretty much from scratch. Whereas now, plug and play, you're up and running in a month, and you have a legitimate, high-quality shopping experience. And so when you think about proliferation of choice, I worked on this back at the Walt Disney Company when we knew that entertainment was going to go online and direct to consumer. What does that mean for competition? Well, back then, Netflix was relatively young, tiny, not that big of a threat. Hulu was relatively young, tiny. These were not the juggernauts that they are today. And so proliferation of choice is a challenge for any business. It's both an opportunity and challenge. Lower barriers to entry means you're going to get more competition. By definition, it's cheaper and faster to ever reach a customer than it ever was before. But at the same time, barriers to scale are large. And this is why you see a lot of businesses, not just in floral, but in any category, that can go from 0 to 1 or 2 or maybe even $5 million a year in revenue, but very few get to 100, 200, 400, $1 billion in revenue. And the delta between the two, in my personal belief, is technology. And the ability to scale without having to spend as you scale is the key to scaling any consumer business, and entertainment, media, whatever it might be. When you invest in systems and tech and you can build a machine that can then do the job of 100 or 300, it enables scale and growth at a rapid rate that is just impossible if everyone was doing everything manually. And this was one of the things that we saw as an opportunity in Floral, was to build something unique that automated a lot of the way all this works. Smart data, smart decision-making, smart routing, where we could scale very quickly. And so technology becomes the sort of big catalyst for dramatic growth. And so I think any brand in any space has to spend time thinking about, in a world with seemingly endless choice, how do we stand out as a brand? But that will only get you so far, because if you have demand for $100 million, but you can only serve 10, it doesn't matter that you've built demand for 100 million. And so you have to build sort of some mechanism, and it could be technology, it could be supply chain, it could be a process, it could be culture, it could be any of these things.
Inventory.
Inventory management, but something that unlocks the scalability of a given business. And for us, that has really been about the mechanism by which we foster these relationships with our farmers.
And I think your marketing also, I would encourage the viewers to check out your marketing, very new, fresh, hip, whether you see it, on Facebook or LinkedIn or even online. You have a new twist on marketing that I think really resonates with, I wouldn't even say the younger customer. I think it's the hip customer, the customer who may not be young, they may be a little bit older, but they're still young thinking, if you will. And I think so I hope the viewers after you see this, really look at the marketing, because it's very differentiated. And speaking of the supply chain, you touched on a little bit, your model is shipping product from the farm directly to the consumer. So what that means is you don't have a plethora of fulfillment centers, and the bouquets aren't touched numerous times, 2 and 3 times. And the consumer gets it faster, which means it's fresher. What is the downside? Is there any downside to that? Or do you feel like that going on will be your business model of the future? Is there any difficulty or complexity in that? Or, because to me, that is one of your points of differentiation. Less people touching it, less handling, faster to the consumer. And especially in today's day and age, you look with COVID, the fact that you didn't have numerous people touching it and having to staff in the middle, I think probably was a benefit to your company. Is there any downside to that, or is it all upside?
Yeah, so we have, our supply chain has gotten dramatically more complex over time because the customers have asked for more. They've asked for faster delivery, they've asked for different sizes, they've asked for vases, they've asked for more variety of product, and we have plants. And so that supply chain has gotten more complex over time. At the very beginning, it was very simple, 2 or 3 farms, 1 point of drop ship, and that was the whole thing. So the technology now manages most of that, for the company, with an amazing supply chain team who work day in and day out to make it happen as well. There are downsides to that model. Shipping is expensive. When product goes far, it's very expensive. It's also can be damaging to the product. If it's 130 in Death Valley and you're shipping to Las Vegas,
Mhm.
I don't care how you ship it. You could be the greatest in the world. It's really hard to keep flowers fresh in 130-degree heat. And then it's not as nimble because you're far away from the customer. And so there are challenges certainly to come with it. The way that we dealt with the complexities is via the technology. We use data, information, and information flow to help manage that as best as is possible. I don't know if we're the best in the world at it, or the second best, or the fifth. I don't know, but we're pretty darn good at it. Our customers really love the experience, so we know we're delivering on it for most of our customers. But it's not the end all be all either. You know, we announced in January, we announced our $30 million latest fundraising. And we talked there about both taking the books internationally for delivery. We've been international for supply chain for years, but we're going to move the business into Asia. We also in that release talked about moving into physical retail. And you know, this creates opportunities for our brand. It creates opportunities for florists and talented floral workers, and for our farmers. And so really we welcome the opportunity to work with, you know, constituents across the supply chain to make the business better. But we still hope to use that technology and that brand to stitch that ecosystem together in a way where we always maintain transparency of source, we always maintain transparency of freshness, and we can do it in a way that is, you know, authentically Books versus, you know, the way that someone else that maybe has been around for a while would do it. And so we're working towards that direction. In a COVID world, you know, things are thrown for delays, for loops, you know, on a daily basis as things open, as things close, as things change. But you'll certainly see some evolution of our brand over the next year, and we're really excited about that next phase of the business.
And tell me this, you mentioned in 2012 when you started, you had one price point, $40, 40 SKUs. Obviously, that's evolved to multiple price points, multiple sizes, as you mentioned. And now you have two categories, fresh cut and potted plants. Do you perceive a need in the future to expand to other categories, food categories, other gifting categories? And if you don't want to share it, that's fine. But do you see the need to expand, as we say, as Amazon's doing, or other .coms? Because if you have the supply chain built, that's 90% of the battle, maybe. Do you see an expansion there with the books, and possibly looking into other categories that you could also sell?
Yeah, so we've had other products sort of in the merchandising mix for some time. It's not typically the majority of what we offer, but seasonally we'll offer things around the winter holidays, around Easter, around Mother's Day, around Valentine's Day. And so we'll bring different things in and out of the category depending on time of year. But really it comes down to what the customer is looking for. And when our customers say, I'd really love to have this, or why can't we have that? We generally listen, and then we respond with something. And so we've inched our way into other categories. You know, the core of what we do is fresh floral, but plants have been demanded by our customers for a long time. We have a really robust plant program now. And other items and other categories will come in. You know, when you look out at the landscape, most of the larger players do offer more than just fresh cut floral. They have various categories that complement or surround, you know, that core experience. I think that says that there's a demand in the market for other types of gifting. I think the key for any business is to figure out what's important to your customer and how does that fit into what your brand does. You know, our brand is about the transparency of supply chain back to the source, the freshness and the quality and the sustainability that comes with it. If that lends itself to other related categories, it may make sense for us to move into that space. Like I said, we've done it a bit. It's certainly not the focus of what we do, though.
And even a lot of the .coms, if you look at it, they sell more non-floral than they do floral products, which is interesting. And they're still touted as a floral company. So good thought. You spoke of omni-channel. You touched on the brick and mortar. What do you see in the future? Obviously, you're going to expand internationally, as you mentioned. How do you see omni-channel? You know, most people say that 80% of the omni-channel starts in the brick and mortar. It doesn't start online. It doesn't start on the telephone. So knowing that information, what's the vision, and how do you perceive the .com will work or morph into brick and mortar in the future, and how would that work?
Yeah, so, you know, you've seen this over the last decade, especially. Brands that were born online are moving into retail, and brands that were born in stores are moving into online. And now with COVID, much faster than they were before. And you saw record earnings out of Walmart, both in store and online, especially during this time. Amazon obviously continues to grow dramatically quickly. So the customer is saying, hey, I want to experience you in these ways, and I want to pick and choose when it's online and when it's in person. So I think you'll continue to see the sort of merging of this across all categories. In online e-commerce, you saw, you know, Bonobos was one of the first to go into what they call guide shops, which are small footprint men's fashion stores. Harry's did their deal with Target, where they took their online only product and put it into Target stores. Casper did a deal with Target, where Target actually became an investor in Casper, the mattress company. And so a lot of categories have seen this overlap. For us, I think we see it fairly similarly to the other categories, which is you have to be where your customers want you to be. Exactly what that's going to look like, we honestly don't know yet. We have a number of hypotheses that we're going to test. We do work with some local florists today, not a large number, but some local florists, and those have been really good relationships for a number of years, so that we can be closer to the customer and satisfy those needs. But over time, you know, I think we'll see that we'll figure out what that exact business model looks like, and it'll be pretty prevalent as part of the brand experience. But exactly where that's going to land right now is still a little bit up in the air.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, the collective industry as a whole, you know, we work 24/7 year round, creating a compelling reason to buy floral products. But the fact is, an average customer only purchases floral roughly 3 times a year on average. What are we doing wrong, and what could we do better in your view?
So I don't know that it's anything that we're doing wrong. I think there are ebbs and flows in consumer behavior that have nothing to do with what the purveyors of a given product do, right? As an example, I don't think Coke or Pepsi did anything to cause people to start drinking a lot less soda. I don't think they caused that. It's just the culture is evolving such that carbonated sugar beverages are frowned upon, and, you know, carbonated water is now the replacement. The same thing is happening with milk. This happens with categories all the time. I think what's awesome about Floral is that it is really at the center of so many important moments in people's lives in this country. You know, people are born, they get flowers. You achieve something, you get flowers. You get engaged, flowers. You get married, flowers. You have a baby, flowers. You die, flowers. Flowers are always with us, no matter what we do. So there is the category has this really important part in American culture that I don't think will ever go away. But we'll see it ebb and flow with sort of the shifts in consumer behavior. You know, Americans are not like Europeans, right? Europeans will buy 4 to 6x amount of dollars per flowers per year on a per capita basis, just because it's much more part of the day-to-day culture. We don't see that same behavior here. It's more of an event-driven item for Americans. And that's not bad, it's just different. And so, you know, what we see is, what I see broadly speaking is a cultural shift that is beginning to happen. It's sort of in the midst of all of the challenging times that we're going through, from civil unrest and political conflict to climate change, to the shift to online and you know, AI is going to be a big change in consumer behavior. Through all of these things, I believe, and I believe that the millennial generation is already doing this, is that there's going to be a shift coming out of COVID, which is this massive event, sort of back to basics, right? People getting out more in nature, people spending more time, more money, more effort around things that feel natural and authentic. And I think floral is a category that can only benefit from that. So I see the next decade and change as being a net positive to the category overall. And so the question is, for any given brand or purveyor, how do you fit into that journey for a given customer? Will that change per capita consumption from 3 times a year to 10? No, it won't. But on the margin, I think we'll see, you know, renewed and continually renewed interest in the category while that trend continues. 10, 15, 20 years from now, when that trend starts to ebb, it'll probably go the other way again. And so I think it really depends on the generation, the formative sort of nature of the cohort of people and how they view the world, and where does floral kind of fit into that. But again, I think that the nice thing about the category is, just like any sort of staple category that is endemic to the way that we operate as humans in this country, it's not going to go anywhere. All of a sudden, people aren't going to say, oh, I'm not going to send any fresh flowers anymore. When someone passes away, they're going to send flowers. On Valentine's Day and Mother's Day, they're often going to send flowers. There's still that proliferation of choice, which may lead to substitution, but you also have just the overall growth of the category, the overall growth of the population. So I don't think we're doing anything wrong as a collective group. I think that as a category, it did fade a bit in sort of the previous generation around, is this a category that's for me? But I see in this millennial generation, and especially the post-millennial generation, a lot of interest in natural, authentic experiences. And I think if anything, that's going to be a positive.
And one of the things there's different ways to attack it. One of the things you mentioned earlier you've done is you've added SKUs, you've expanded price points. So it's not, there are different ways to grow a company. And if a customer is only going to buy 3 times a year, add more categories that are possibly more compelling. For instance, the gifting and the home decor, which I saw on your website, you're really showing your plants in that light. Customers who may buy grandma something, but they also may buy something for their home, which many times is a plant versus a fresh cut flower. Maximizing price points, as you mentioned, your customers want as well. If you could sell a $40 bouquet, you could probably sell a $60 bouquet. So there are other ways that we can grow that, even if the customer stays with it the 3 times a year, if you will.
Absolutely.
The other consumer question is, most floral companies have a mantra: the customer is number one. The customer is number one. How do we prove that in our industry? We deal with a product for the most part that dies, no matter how good you take care of it. And so one of the things that many customers say is, well, I don't buy flowers because they die, or they're hard to take care of, or I don't know about them, or I don't know how to take care of them, or I don't know how to keep them living longer, if you will. How do we solve that? And how do you perceive that could be solved or improved in the future?
I mean, a lot of the reason why we built the supply chain we built was to extend vase life, so that the customer feels like they get a lot more value out of the product. And so that's very core to what we do. But I think more broadly speaking, the way that we think about bouqs is and we don't say customer first, we say community first. And the customer is a very important part of that community, but our farmers are equally important to us. Our local florists that we partner with are equally important to us, and our employees are equally important to us. And so we really try to build solutions, economic models, technology that helps everyone rise together, rather than saying, well, the customer is going to win, so therefore you, farmer, are going to lose, or vice versa. We really try to make it so that all ships rise together. We really believe internally and inherently that through the use of technology and a mantra around community first, that we can help everyone understand better what role everyone plays in the ecosystem and how it can be better together. As for those folks that just don't want to buy flowers or don't believe in flowers, whatever it might be, and I've met plenty of them, in the years when I was out pitching this product to everyone and, in community events, whatever it might be, inevitably someone would say, oh, my girlfriend hates flowers. She just doesn't want me to waste the money. I don't spend my time trying to convince that person that they should have a different point of view. I'll either give them a bouquet and let them see if they'll enjoy it or not, or move on to somebody who's predisposed to at least give it a shot. Because for some people, for whatever reason, it's just not their thing. And that's totally okay, right? It's a $100 billion global industry, despite there forever being people that say, I'm just not that into flowers. And so we don't make it our mission to try to change their minds, but we do make it our mission to try to make sure that those customers that are in the ecosystem and our farmers and our florist partners all win together. So
you focus on the yes.
Exactly.
Let's talk about your podcast, which I mentioned earlier on our
Giving the biz.
Very funny, very light, not what you'd expect, very unexpected. And I remember in one of your podcasts, you talked about your father a little bit. And I know you also have family in the grocery business as well. Are any of your family members involved in the business? And what part does your family, have they played and do they play now in the business, if any?
Yeah, I mean, we started off truly as a family operation in the beginning. My one sister, Jill, was our first salesperson. My other sister, Sarah, ran HR for us for almost 4 years, like 3.5 years. She did all of our HR. She was an HR consultant by trade, and so she essentially donated her services. My sister Jill is also an investor. My parents are an investor. In that first $13,000, they got some really early shares, and they've made a good amount of money on those shares. So they've done well. My mother was actually our very first customer service rep. So when we launched the business, she was 70 years old, had been retired for 10 years or so. And I said, Mom, you're coming out of retirement. I need you to help out. She was doing very high-end service for medical devices in her career, but she had a really great presence with people. She really cared. She cared about the business success. So both my sisters, my mom pitched in, all the time. In the beginning, half of our customers were probably family and friends. In South America, my co-founder, on our very first shipment day, his mother and his sister came out to help him pack the boxes, because we launched and we all of a sudden got 12 orders and we had no process by which to pack the boxes. So they drove out to the farm where he was working and they put those bouquets together themselves. And then, countless hours of support from my wife, from my co-founder's family, and just helping make things work. A startup is really hard, especially when you don't have a lot of resources, a big team, whatever it might be. Building these businesses, like you said earlier, 24/7. And so the family has been really part and parcel sort of the whole way. Now we're at a point where over the last few years, their roles have diminished to ended, just because we moved from being what was a very small and kind of bootstrapped, hacky organization to now a team of north of 90 people and, large amounts of revenue and a full team. And, we've hired executives and they have teams. And so while they're, of course, willing to help, it just hasn't been necessarily the right way to run the business, as we didn't think of this as a family business. We really thought of this as a corporation that we want to grow to be very large, to have great big impact in the world. And so we sort of phased out the familial day-to-day roles. My mother lasted the longest in customer service, actually worked with us actively up until this past Valentine's Day, and has been sort of rolling off, across this year. But truly, we would not be where we are if those family and friends hadn't been willing to pitch in. And the early employees, I consider them family at this point. Those folks worked for free. They worked for free nights and weekends, and then they came on full time and they took salary cuts, massive salary cuts, just to try to get it off the ground because they believed in it. And so, all of those early employees from, employee 1 to 20, where we were just trying to figure it out. We were probably not the best place to work. We were working out of a house with a big backyard and a koi pond, which was fun, but we didn't have heat. The first winter in LA, which typically LA's winters are pretty mild, it was actually kind of cold. And we all had blankets and space heaters for everyone, because that little 1940s bungalow was not the best insulated and actually didn't have a working furnace. And so, people that believe in what these entities can be someday have outsized impact. And it's typically those really early folks that really go above and beyond. And so those folks are beyond employees, beyond friends, they're family as well.
And you mentioned getting through the holidays, Valentine. Oh my goodness, your first Valentine. That's enough to tax any employee, even the strongest person. So those people that were working for free and the family members, for them to stick through that is telling.
Yeah, I remember the very first Valentine's Day. I don't remember what we shipped, a couple thousand orders. And I remember my co-founder telling me, we'll never be able to ship more than that. That is the most we'll be able to ship. And we ship that in a couple hours a day, off peak now. And so the evolution of the business is kind of remarkable to see when you sort of look back onto those early days where, again, his mom and sister were manually creating boxes for us to be able to ship.
And in your growth from where you started to where you are today, what was your biggest obstacle? And how did you thrive and survive through that obstacle? Was there a time when you thought, wait a minute, we have to really rethink this and do something different? What was that challenge?
Yeah, we've been lucky in a lot of startups, it's called pivoting. You start in a direction and then it doesn't work. You have to change dramatically. We didn't really have that. The core of what we set out to do is still what we do on a day-to-day basis. I think the hardest part about building a business that gets this big, this fast, and that is going to get bigger is building for the future today. It's really hard to invest today for something that's not going to pay off for 2 or 3 years, especially when you're on limited resources. And I think that's probably the place where we missed the most. At different times, we should have invested more in people or process or technology, and we didn't, because we prioritized, the next 6 months or the next year over the long run. And ultimately, at some point, you have to build, if you're building a business for scale, you have to build for the future. And so that leads to a little bit of a 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of a thing, which is very natural in business. But I think it's probably the hardest part because, how much to focus on right now, what do we need versus what do we need in 6 months versus what do we need in 6 years? That balance is really hard to strike. Again, when you have limited resources, limited dollars, limited time, limited people, how you make those trade-offs is, for me, been the hardest part. I think we've done a decent enough job. We've certainly had times where we said, oh boy, we got really behind in people, process, technology, whatever it might be, and now we need to fix it. But thankfully, at no point in the business did we say, all right, our thesis is just not going to work. Customers don't want to shop this way, or the business can't grow if this is what we stick to. We've really focused heavily on this farm relationship, and that's been the core of what we've done. And we've never had to say at any point, you know what, that's just not going to work. So we've been lucky in that respect, since so many early stage businesses have to make those changes.
And one last question before we close. If you could share one tip with Floral folks who are going to be watching this, and they could be traditional florists, e-commerce, supermarket, back end, front end, the whole gamut. What is one tip that you could share, or 1 ounce of wisdom that you have or you've learned that you could share with the folks watching this? Sure.
My self-serving one would be, even if you don't think you could work with us, reach out to us, because we probably want to work with you. We are, I guess, at a community building enterprise, and some folks might look at our brand from the outside and think there's no way we could ever work with them. They might be surprised if you get under the hood and spend a little time with us. But more broadly, I think our category is very hard, right? When I started into this, very honestly, I thought it was going to be kind of easy. And as I learned about the category, I figured out why floral is so tough. And I think my broadest piece of advice for everyone that works in this space is, keep in mind what you're there for, what your mission is, what you care about, and always remember how important this is. This, call it $40 to $150 purchase on average. Keep in mind how darn important it is to that customer in that moment. One of the reasons I wanted to start this category is I had a few moments in my life that were super impactful where floral was at that moment. And that has stayed with me for my entire adult life. And, sometimes when you're in it, you're processing lots of orders, there's lots of stress, the weather isn't cooperating, there's a shortage of X or Y happened, whatever it is, it's hard to remember that how really important that moment is. And I think if you keep that true north in mind, you keep that sort of mission in mind, it makes all of it more easier to get through and ultimately more worthwhile.
I remember, your comment on remember why you do what you do. And we had some stores during Hurricane Katrina, and we had just started rebuilding our stores after the flood, and nobody was there. We were one of the first people that were rebuilding, and we were setting up our flower shop, and a customer came by and she handed me her camera. And it just survived or just started rebuilding after Hurricane Katrina. She handed me her camera, and I was setting up floral displays. And she said, will you take my picture in front of, at the time it was Mom's, will you take my picture in front of all these flowers? And I said, sure. Are you going to send them to somebody? And she said, I want to send this picture to my mother, because if I'm in front of these beautiful flowers, she's going to know I'm okay.
Yeah.
And at that point, I've always said, similar to what you just said, watch your customers, see the joy they're feeling. And that really grounds you again after all the blood, sweat, and tears. It really shows you why we do what we do. And you've explained that so well.
Well, I think it's the heart of what we all do, right? And thanks so much for organizing the event in the virtual COVID world and for letting me be a small part of it.
Well, thank you, John. And on behalf of International Floriculture Expo, I'm Cindy Hanauer, John Tabis from the Bouqs, B-O-U-Q-S. Look them up, look at the podcast. You're going to really be blown away. But thank you so much, John. You shared great insight. We could go on and on and on, but we only have an hour. So thank you so much, and we hope to see you soon.
Thanks so much. Have a great one.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.